All right, welcome everyone. Welcome to our Math Kangaroo 2021 full analysis that is conducted by Think Academy. So as we all know, this year's Math Kangaroo exam was successfully completed in March. And then the student immediately received their scores. And then in last month, all the rewards, all the awards, and the national and the state ranking were released by Math Kangaroo. So first of all, I want to congratulations for everyone who have completed the exam and also did well, and also for those that did well in the exam. You guys did a very great job. But first of all, let's look at the this year's exam statistics. All right. So for level 1. There are a total of 2,840 participants just in level 1. And actually among all of those students, only 133 of them received a rank 1, which means they got all the question correct. And then actually only 1.7% of the total participant received the remaining top ranks, which is rank 2, rank 3, and rank 4. But for those 3 ranks, it just means the students only got one question wrong, no matter it's a 3-point question, 4-point question, or 5-point question. That is the top 4 rankings. Okay, you have to get everything correct, or at least at most one question wrong to be in to rank the top 4. And then for level 2, since it is the exact same exam, just like level 1. But since students at level 2 are 1 year older than level 1 students, so actually the results are relatively better. About 6.7% of the students receive full mark, and then another 7% of the students only get one question wrong. And actually, if we look back to the actual exam for this year's Math Kangaroo Level 1 to 2 exam, actually getting rank 1, or let's say rank 1 to number 4 in level 1 to 2, it is not something unachievable, since it doesn't really require the students to have a lot of, let's say, in-depth knowledges. Instead, it focuses more on the logics or understanding of the question and the studying behavior of the participants. So I really hope this webinar will be useful for all the parents who would love their students to participate in next year's Math Kangaroo exam, no matter it's level 1 to 2 or level 3 to 4. Hope it will help you guys. So now let's actually take a look at what level 1 to 2 is actually covered in this year. So actually, after browsing this exam booklet that we have, we actually categorize all the 24 questions into 5 different modules, which are numbers and operations, aka calculation, and also word problems, geometry, counting and statistics, and finally the combinatorics. So as we can see here, so for 2021, counting, geometry, word problems, and numbers and operations, they are pretty even. It's all around like 15 to 20%. And at the same time, combinatorics is still the most frequent appear modules among all 5 modules. And if we compare the distribution of each module between 2020 to 2021, we can actually notice that the combinatorics is definitely the most popular module. However, the percentage of counting and statistics actually decline while the weight of numbers and operations question starts to rise a little bit. So with a pretty even distribution among all 4 modules, it actually means that the students must have a broad understanding of all modules, and an advantage in just a specific module might not give you a good result. So actually, in the other hand, combinatorics is usually the most complicated questions that appear in an exam, which require the students to combine, let's say, multiple knowledges to solve one particular problem. And actually, the thinking process and the logics are sometimes, it cannot be ignored. So however, after all of those data analysis, but the distribution among modules actually varies year to year, because actually starting from 5 years ago, the numbers and operation weight is actually super high. And the combinatorics, the distribution of combinatorics is actually pretty low. So it is not a 100% thing to predict that for next year. So actually a well-run exam prep and an understanding among, let's say, all different modules that is covered by Math Kangaroo is actually super necessary. And then let's talk about each module individually, okay? So the first module I want to talk about is actually the geometry. So geometry, it is actually known for its complexity and also the various question types. So actually usually stuff like area, parameters, circles, for all of those stuff that is very popular in school and also in AMC8, it is not a main target in Math Kangaroo. But stuff like cutting, reflection, rotation, those stuff are actually pretty common. So instead of hardcore geometry concepts, Math Kangaroo actually focus more on building up the fundamental spatial sense. So the concept itself is something that actually the parents are usually ignored because there's not much to talk about. For symmetry, that is just a very easy concept for students to understand. Same thing for cutting and combining that we have over here. But the thing is, why does students still have trouble getting those questions correct? Even though the concept itself is actually not super hard. Because if we look at question 5 over here, we are just trying to find the mirror reflection of this shirt in the mirror. And then, of course, there are numbers on the shirt. The one of the most challenging thing for the parents and also for the students is, where is actually the mirror? Is it like in front of the shirt, or is it on the left or on the right side of the shirt? Because if the students cannot identify the position, or let's say the location of the shirt, sometimes they are gonna get it correct. They are gonna get it incorrect because that actually determines how those numbers actually reflect in the mirror. And then take a look at the second question. For question number 13, this is not something which is very common, right? Because we are just cutting this square into two pieces and then we want to combine them together. And our goal is to trying to find what is like the correct way to combine them. What is the actual combining piece after we combine those two parts together? So actually for students who are very sloppy, this type of geometry question is a nightmare for them. Because for example, let's take a look at this question. Actually, when I look at this question, my first instinct actually tells me the answer is C. However, if you look and think about this further, you should realize that the correct answer is actually A, right? Because not only we have to combine those two pieces together, we also have to rotate it to get the correct answer. So, but the students who really trust their first instinct and also they are overconfident, they will fall into those questions easily, especially those questions that need patience. Because if we for those type of question, we need to make sure every single pieces are matching with each other. So that's why I fell into option C, because I only look at the bottom left corner instead of the whole picture, which is very easy to get it wrong. And then talking about a calculation and the word problem part, usually those two modules are the parts I personally think is pretty easy. And I think it's the easy shots for students to receive scores in Math Kangaroo. So as long as the students has, let's say, a regular ability, let's say to extract numbers, either from the question or from the pictures, shapes, figures, and they are supposed to do pretty well. And actually the calculation itself is definitely not very challenging, and it's also friendly for both grade 1 and grade 2 students, because for all of those questions, multiplication and division, it is not a must-know knowledge, and the students can use either addition and subtraction to solve the question. It's just a matter of time management. But actually this year's there is kind of like an outlier for Math Kangaroo, which is question 18 over here. And since I talked to a lot of the students that actually took Math Kangaroo this year, this is one of the questions that they struggles. And this is actually pretty challenging for a lot of students, which actually testing the students' understanding about a knowledge called equivalent substitution. And so if we look at this question very, very carefully, we should know that we can convert the apples to bananas. We can also convert the bananas to apples, right? So those two things can actually convert to each other. So as long as we still have enough of one type of the fruit, it is just like converting nonstop, right? So actually, to get this question correct, the student has to know what they are doing. And at the same time, the best way to get this question correct is not to just think about this in your brain, because it is very easy to mess up. Try to draw this figure down and then group the apples in one group. And then for the bananas, put them in another group. And then clearly draw it for every single steps. And then it's gonna be after the students draw every single steps down, it is gonna be better. And then eventually they will see the number of fruit is actually decreasing, and finally they will get the correct answer. And then for the next modules I want to talk about is actually counting. Okay, so for the counting questions, I think the most essential part is about reading. And also the concept of counting in order. So for example, for question 21 over here, the most important thing for this question is to understand the second sentence, which I underline with a red line on the bottom. So actually the question said there are 3 girls and 2 boys, they were dancing, and they danced in pairs so that each girl danced with each boy for exactly 1 minute. And a lot of students are getting super confused on this part. So what does this question want us to do? Actually, if you understand the second question, you should realize this question is just matching in orders. So what are they matching? 3 girls, 2 boys. How many different combinations can we have? You know, each girl can match with 2 boys. And since there are 3 girls, in total, we just have 6 different combinations, right? And each combination only takes 1 minute. 6 combinations means 6 minutes. Okay, so it is, again, it's all about understanding what the question is asking us to do. And actually, final thing I want to talk about is the combinatorics part. Okay, so a lot of people don't really understand what is a combinatorics, because that is something that is actually kind of confusing, right? But combinatorics, it's like a mix of a lot of knowledges. It's actually just a lot of knowledges combining together. And you know, sometimes it is very hard to find a pattern, and also to find the correct knowledges we have to study on. For example, the 2 questions that I listed from this year. For question number 9 that we have, I mean, it looks pretty easy, right? It's just that we just have a scissors. We're gonna cut it into 2 parts. All we have to do is to find how many pieces of ribbons that we actually have. And actually, this is actually pretty friendly for all level of students, because even though they don't know the tricks, they can still count it part by part by just like underlying all those ribbons into different pieces. However, if he actually studied this before, they should know that for this type of question specifically, the correct way, or let's say the most efficient way to actually solve this question, is to count how many cuts that we have. So actually in this question, we have 11 cuts. Then the total number of pieces should be the number of cuts plus 1. That's how simple this question is. However, but for combinatorics, since we have so many different topics to cover, some students cannot cover this topic and they don't know the tricks behind it. So that's, and the same thing for question, is actually the same thing for question 24. The student has the ability to actually compare the different toys in order and then match them, combine them in order, and then to see what are the possible scenarios that we have to put the puzzle. Okay, so actually combinatorics, again, is a combination of multiple concepts that test the students' logical thinking ability. So again, this is the part that I think most students are struggled on, and since we have so many different questions that are covered in each year's Math Kangaroo exam, that is the part that students should be work on the most. All right, and so again, I want everyone to take a moment to actually recall I just want to ask everyone a question super quick. Okay, so actually, for part 3, I'm going to talk about habits. But before we do that, I just want to show everyone that actually Think Academy has a lot of resources to actually help the students to prepare for Math Kangaroo exam. Because first of all, we have something called Think Wiki. And for Think Wiki, it is actually on our official Think Academy exam. And so if you want to know more about Math Kangaroo exam and also the previous Math Kangaroo previous exams and also the video solutions, you can definitely try out our Think Wiki and find all those resources in the official Think Academy website. And also, if you have more questions, definitely scan the QR code right here, and we are going to help the students to designate it and help them to actually solve and assign with different learning paths. And so again, I want to ask everyone a question super quick. So actually at the same level of IQ and hard work, what actually differentiate the final result of Math Kangaroo? It is actually the habit. Okay, so actually for the studying habit, or like say the exam habit, there are only 3 different elements, which is the appropriate exam habit, the reading ability, and also the efficient exam prep. Okay, so actually, again, that's the 3 questions that I want to ask all the parents. So take a moment and recall the last time that the students was taking the exam and ask yourself 3 questions. Okay, first, did he use scratch papers? Second, if yes, all right, did he actually review his works on scratch papers? And third, when he writes on the scratch papers, is it actually readable? So actually all of those questions can determine their exam habit. First of all, if a student just relying on his brain to solve any type of problems, then it is definitely not enough. And actually for all of those combinatoric questions, which requires in-depth thinking, only use their brain. It is definitely not enough for sure. So actually, hold on a second. Just give me 20 seconds. All right, so I just hide my camera in the back, so now nothing should be covered. So actually, for writing those steps, because some students are actually better at reviewing some of those. Because for those 3 questions that we have, some students, they just don't use scratch papers at all. They just rely on their brains. And then some students are better because their parents actually tell them, hey, you have to write your steps on your paper. But then after they are done with the question, they actually have no idea where to trace back the steps that they actually write down. Then how can he review them afterwards? And how do we know which question the students actually has a hard time solving if we don't even know where he write at the first place? And actually for a great habit, it requires 3 elements as well. First is reading the question. Second, it is writing the steps. And then the third one, it is actually review them. And we can talk about each elements for like 20 and 30 minutes, but just to make it short, I'm not going to go into too deep about those 3 elements, because first of all, not only we have to read it. Okay? For reading the question, read it is just the most basic thing. The second thing should be the students has to be able to abstract the key informations. Highlight the parts that is important and also able to understand what every sentence actually means. And then for writing steps, just like I mentioned, student has to know how to use the scratch papers correctly. Writing it neatly is just like he write it on a school assignment. And then if the students needs to go back and check their thinking process, there is definitely a place to find it. And finally, about reviews. For a lot of students, they know that for a very important exam, it is essential to review it, but most of the times, the students actually start to review them after they were told by their parents, and they don't know what is the appropriate way to actually review them. So when every time a student review the questions, they are all thinking, so do I redo the question again, or do I just solve it with my brain again? So actually, that's why we need the scratch papers, okay? To actually trace the thinking process and be able to read it again whenever we need to review it. And actually, for those three elements, it is not something that can be done by a day. It is actually a daily activity. So actually, without a long-term daily exercise, the student will not be able to adapt this habit. Habits are trained and practiced, and we cannot expect the students to acquire it just suddenly after we tell them to do so. And the second thing I want to talk about is about how to improve their readings. Okay, so I know a lot of parents are always frustrated at their students, especially on the word problems, on the geometries, on the combinatorics. They are like, all of those questions, the concept we have already learned it before. But then the student just cannot understand the question, and they got super frustrated. But the thing is, student cannot interpret the question correctly. It is not because they don't understand it. It's just a very simple result because they are lacking of practice. So try it this way, okay? We don't have to do a whole bunch of practice and just enormously just give it to students. Like you have to do 20 lessons or 20 questions in a day. All right, it is totally unnecessary. The best way to actually help the students to improve their reading abilities is to just read 1 to 2 word problems daily, and then find the key informations just like the students are doing it in the exam. All right, read it first, highlight it, and then start to solve the problem. But that is not the end. Okay, after the students finish those 2 problems, the students have to explain how he solved this question to their parents. Because if the students can orally explain it well, that means the students actually already has a very smooth logic. So no matter if the method he did or she did is correct, it is about smoothing their logics and actually express it. So actually, Think Academy also have activities like this that we invite a lot of our current students to participate and explain one problem. And we can clearly see the difference that if the students daily participate to practice their oral about their oral logics, the difference is actually pretty obvious. And then for the final part that I want to talk about is I actually get this concerns from a parent, and the parents actually tells me that so my son actually already finished all the previous Math Kangaroo exams before. Pretty much for the past 10 years, he has already finished them all. But the result is still not ideal. He only gets a low 80 on this year's exam. And actually that actually makes me reflect a little bit because Think Academy has done a lot of deep research on Math Kangaroo, and we noticed that pretty much every year, more than 80-90% of the questions were actually covered in the previous 5 years. Definitely not the same question, but the concept. Okay, there is nothing new over here. However, why does this student still cannot get a full mark or at least a rank 4 in this year's exam? So I think a lot of the parents have a misunderstanding about enormous practicing. Because first of all, complete all the previous exams. It doesn't mean you will get a gold medal. And it also doesn't mean the students fully understand the knowledge. Okay, so actually the quantity is not that important. It is all about quality. Okay, so for example, just like the question that I raised before for that cutting the rope question. I mean, the students can do 100 of those questions daily, and he can just count it by themselves every single time. And sometimes they can count it correct, sometimes they can count it wrong. But the students doesn't actually acquire the most designated way to solve this question. Okay, they don't know the most efficient way to do this is to just count how many cuts we have and then simply plus 1. So when the students get to do a huge number of practices, that's good, but it doesn't determine the student's performance, because if he doesn't really acquire the method, then the students still lack of it's not lack of practice, it is lack of the way to summarize all the questions he do. Okay, so actually the student doesn't have to do that many questions. Actually daily he can just do 1 or 2 questions, or at most 5 questions a day. But at the same time, just for this specific question, try to dig deeper. All right, let the students to use their way to solve it first, and then redo it again. Can he think about an easier way to do it? Or try to relate this knowledge with the previous knowledges that he has previously done before. And then to see, is there any easier way to do it? Okay, the student always have to pushing themselves and ask themselves, do we have an easier way to do it? And then once the student actually summarize the method by themselves, and then he should realize this no matter how much the question is changing, no matter it has a picture or not, or it has a lot of shapes or not, that he should know that all the questions, they are actually pretty much the same. And the knowledge is the most important one. And no matter how many questions you do, if you haven't summarized this well, then it pretty much means nothing. Okay, so again, I just want to pop this up again for if the parents needs more resources about Math Kangaroo, definitely check our wiki, because I think starting from next week, we are going to upload this year's Math Kangaroo real questions on our website, and it also contains the videos to better help the students to summarize all the methods or all the knowledges that appeared in this year's Math Kangaroo exam. So if there is anything that Think Academy can do, definitely reach out to us, and we are glad to help. So thank you again for participating in this week's webinar, and thanks again. Hope to see you guys soon. Bye bye.